Most people chase confidence like it's a destination. But what if confidence is a place you arrive, but a story you gradually stop disagreeing with? Today, we're breaking open one idea that changes everything. Your perception of yourself becomes your reality. This isn't some self-help fluff. This is psychology, because how you see yourself doesn't just influence your life, it shapes it. 1. What drives self-doubt?
If someone was to listen to our podcast today, what would they overcome and what skills would they build?
So this is essentially going to be a masterclass on self-doubt, but not only what it is, actually determining for yourself what are the drivers of your self-doubt. Because we think self-doubt is just one big blob of worry and anxiety and insecurity. But when we look at decades worth of literature, my own research over the past 5 years, we've distilled it down to 4 main drivers. And so if you're able to determine, okay, where am I on these drivers? Which one is really propelling my self-doubt? That allows you to then determine what you need to do to move through it. As you said, self-doubt doesn't necessarily disappear with achievement. It doesn't disappear as you advance in your career. It just scales with responsibility. But the real measure of someone's success and happiness is if they can hear the voice of self-doubt and still move forward anyway. Yeah. And so what I want to help everyone listening with today is to determine which of the drivers of their self-doubt is taking the driver's seat and then exactly what they need to do to move through it so they can get the connection they want, the success they want, the performance that they want, and create the life that they want.
Here's the truth. Self-doubt is not a flaw. It's a signal, a psychological pattern based on old beliefs about who you are. 2. Power of self-image.
Let's talk about the 4 drivers because I'm fascinated now as well to
Let's do it.
To discover which ones I've been dealing with.
Yes.
Yeah,
we can actually diagose your doubt profile.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So the first thing we need to do is rewind a little bit. How did we come across these 4 drivers? So we've been working with leaders and teams across organizations for the last 5 to 10 years. That's tens of thousands of people. And we found that, again, no matter where someone was at on their journey, they were hearing this voice of doubt. And it would sound different and it would look different. But then we wanted to know, okay, specifically, what is driving this? And we need to bring it back to something called your self-image. Let me tell you about a study that was conducted in the 70s, and it opens your mind as to the power of the self-image that we have about ourselves and how that keeps repeating throughout our lives. So in the 1970s, a psychology professor by the name of Robert Kleck from Dartmouth, he conducted this fascinating experiment where he brought people together, he split them into groups, and with one group, he drew a scar on their face from their right ear to the side of their mouth. Big, ugly scar, and he let them see themselves in a hand mirror. Then he sends the groups out to have conversation with strangers, right? So you have one group that has this scar, another group has no scar. After the conversations, they come back and they report on how they felt the conversation went. The group with the scar overwhelmingly reported that they felt judged, it was tense, the other person was distant because of the scar. But here is where it gets really interesting. If we rewind just a little bit, right before the researchers sent them out into these conversations, he applied moisturizing cream to the scar. So they'd just seen themselves in the mirror. He then applies this cream, but he doesn't tell them that he's removing the scar.
Wow.
So now they have no scar on their face, but they believe that they do. No. They go into these conversations believing, expecting they will be treated badly, poorly, judged. And that's what they experienced.
Wow.
It's wild. When you think about the implications for us in our lives, okay, it may not be a physical scar, but we all have beliefs or expectations about ourselves based on how we see ourselves, our self-image. And then we're going to notice things that reinforce it because of how the brain is wired. Confirmation bias, selective attention. Your brain is wired to magnify what you focus on. So if you're going into your life, into your conversations, into your meetings, into your work, believing that you're not worthy, that you're not capable, that you don't deserve it, you're going to notice things that reinforce that, and it's only going to make you feel worse. So we know that about self-image. So the first question to ask ourselves is, what are these invisible scars that we are carrying throughout our lives? How can we become more aware of them? So then my next question is, great. So that's the power of self-image, and self-image drives our self-doubt. But how do you measure self-image? If I were to ask you, Jay, what do you think your self-image is? You might share something, and then I'd ask someone else, what do you think your self-image is? And they might share something else. We need to determine if something is measurable. so we can determine what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at over 50 years worth of research, this is when we find that, yes, there's a lot of information out there, but it really comes down to just 4 dimensions of how we see ourselves. And when these 4 things come together, that shapes our self-image. It shapes how we interact with the world. Not only that, these 4 things that actually have their base in our personality, they have been shown through meta-analyses of over 100 studies to predict our success, our job performance, our career satisfaction, how happy we are in our life and our relationships. And it all comes down to these 4 things. And I could not believe it when I came across it. So let me tell you what these 4 things are, because essentially these 4 things drive our self-image, which then drives our self-doubt when they're weak.
Your self-image isn't made of facts. It's made of stories you learned about yourself, reinforced over time. 3. The 4 pillars of self-image.
So the very, very first one, the first driver of your self-doubt, which shapes your self-image, is what we call acceptance, self-acceptance. It relates to this personality trait of self-esteem. So how you see yourself in terms of your value and your worth. Now, if you don't accept yourself, it shows up in 4 painfully familiar habits. The first one is what we call the pressure to prove. You feel like you constantly have to prove yourself through your work, through your performance. You have to prove that you are of value to other people, so you seek their validation and their praise. And when you don't get it, it becomes this automatic switch, and you need to win it back. That's the first. The second one is what we call the shrinking syndrome. So this is where someone might be afraid of success because they don't accept who they are. And therefore, they're afraid of what will happen if something amazing happens to them, because deep down, they don't feel like they deserve it. So then they try and sabotage before they get there. The third is what we call the Schadenfreude cycle. And the Schadenfreude cycle, you may have heard of it. It's a German term. It's that moment when you see someone else fail and you suddenly feel really good about yourself. You feel a little bit better about yourself. You enjoy other people's failures. This is a sign that you do not accept yourself.
Wow.
Your self-esteem is suffering. And then the 4th pattern that we see here is, of course, that endless need for approval. We need other people to like us, to validate us. We might become codependent in our relationships. We say yes when we really want to say no. We wear masks and contort ourselves to better suit the people around us. But in doing so, we lose ourselves. So that is the first and, in my view, the most foundational: acceptance.
And as I'm learning about it from you, it feels like that starts so early and you're just carrying it for all these years. And then you become aware of it when you're starting to apply for a job, or you're wanting to put yourself forward for a promotion, or you're trying to find the relationship of your dreams. And all of a sudden now you're like, well, why do I feel this way? And I can imagine a lot of our listeners right now are sitting here going, Sade, I do all of those 4 things.
That's me.
Yeah, that's me. And so if someone's listening right now and they're saying, Sade, Jay, that's me. I do all 4 of those things. I have no idea. Do I have to stop doing those things? Do I have to? So self-acceptance, that is the issue that I'm having. I don't accept myself according to your 4 measures. Where do I even begin to go? What questions should I be asking from that point?
So I love how you mentioned that we develop this early in life. Let's start there, and then we'll go to how we can start to break the attachment that we have to this. So generally, this sense of acceptance that we have develops in the first 3 to 4 years. Initially, it's based on the response we get from our parents, our primary caregivers. And then it also develops based on whether we feel that we get the emotional support and the nurturing that we need.
You see, your self-image isn't random. It has structure. And those 4 dimensions create a filter through which your brain interprets everything. 4. Self-acceptance struggles.
If you feel like you constantly have to earn your parents' attention or do something exciting to get them to pay attention to you, then we develop this belief that I must perform to be worthy. It can also happen later in life when a parent says to you or compares your report card, your grades, to a sibling, or makes you feel like you're only of value when you're winning an award or coming first in the swimming competition that you're in, the race. So we develop these really early on. And, we do need to acknowledge so much of who we are as a result of those early experiences. That doesn't mean we are a prisoner to that. And it doesn't mean that we should be blaming that environment and our parents and the caregivers that we had. We need to acknowledge that they were doing the best that they could with what they knew at the time. We have this beautiful ability of taking ownership of our lives, which actually comes down to the third pillar, which we'll get to, which allows us to, as you said, become aware of these patterns. So often, Jay, and if you're listening, you may find that you have not been aware of these things. And it's only when you listen to sessions like this, conversations like this, when you read a book, where you suddenly start to almost self-diagnose and realize, uh-oh, this is me. See that as a really positive thing because you're identifying that you are part of this experience as opposed to just this is who I am. So that's a really positive thing. So what do we do if we identify, okay, I'm really struggling with acceptance? The very first thing is to acknowledge that you are not your thoughts and you are not your beliefs. Beliefs are simply just a repeated pattern of thought that has happened so many times in our brain that it becomes a default. It's just a really, really fast process, neural pathway. And in the same way that a belief is formed early in our lives, we can overwrite that belief. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes repetition. Yes, it takes practice. But we have the ability to do that through conscious choice. And so the moment you start noticing that you're feeling insecure, those thoughts come into your mind, I can't do this, I don't deserve this, I'm not enough. That's the key phrase for someone who lacks acceptance. I'm not enough. So I must prove that I'm enough. I must earn that feeling from other people. I must chase it through achievement. The moment you notice that, consciously re-engage the prefrontal part of your brain. This is how you re-engage attention and say to yourself, hold on, I don't need to believe that thought. I don't need to believe that belief. Remind yourself that I have value. I am of value. And one of the simplest hacks that you can use in those moments is to stop thinking about yourself. I know that sounds really odd to say, but when we are suffering with a lack of self-acceptance, it's always I, me, my. How do they see me? How am I coming across? What am I doing right now? If you can shift and go, okay, how can I be here for them? How can I be of value? How can I be of service? How can I make this person feel seen? That's called self-forgetting. And research shows that this process of self-forgetting, by becoming more service-oriented, helps to quieten that incessant voice of the ego.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how when you tap into that, suddenly you realize, okay, I don't have to be so in my head.
Yeah.
I want to share just a couple of really simple techniques for anyone who really does struggle with acceptance. The first one is if you struggle with acceptance, you are going to attach your sense of identity to your job and to your achievements and to your performance. So if things are going well professionally, if you're achieving things, if you're doing amazing things, you feel fantastic. And then something happens and it all crumbles and you fail, you take it personally. You internalize that failure. Mm-hmm. So the first and foremost thing you need to do is acknowledge you are not your job. There is so much to you that exists outside of that environment, which I know is really hard to do if you work, especially in a corporate organization, where your entire status is determined by your job title and how well you're delivering and your promotion track record, right? So we tend to internalize these things, but you need to consciously remind yourself through that prefrontal activation, I am not my job. I am so much more than this. And there's a really interesting little technique we like to share. Not even a technique, it's actually a suggestion. So Jay, there was a study that was conducted with Nobel Prize winning scientists, and they looked at 500 of them, and they found that they were 3 times more likely than regular scientists to have a creative hobby. Mm-hmm. Not only that, they were 22 times more likely than regular scientists to have a hobby in the performing arts, singing, music, drama.
Wow.
Many of them attribute that hobby to helping them bounce back when things didn't go to plan, and also to allowing them to make connections that other people wouldn't have been able to. Mm. And so what can we take from that?
Brilliant.
It's great, right? It's
so
a cool
good.
study. What can we take from that? Well, having something outside of work that we can pour ourselves into, especially something creative, because we know about the impact that has in the brain, that allows us to remind ourselves, hey, even if I didn't do well today at work, even if I didn't achieve this thing that I wanted to, I get to go and take on that character in that play.
Yes.
I get to go and pick up my guitar. I get to go and paint that beautiful painting. And fascinatingly, hobbies, especially creative hobbies, have been found to increase your self-esteem, which increases your sense of self-acceptance.
Yes.
So it's a very odd one, but I would encourage you, if you struggle here, go and pick up a hobby and embrace the messiness of being a beginner.
I love how practical, tactical, and simple this is. and simple in a good way, in that I think anyone who's listening right now, they've got their plan of action for acceptance. You've got the questions to ask yourself, or to make sure, I don't need to believe that. I don't need to agree with those beliefs. I don't need to agree with those thoughts. You've got the idea of what's your hobby. And so I love that you said that. And I started thinking about my own, and I've got a fair few. I've got pickleball. I play a ton of football or soccer when I'm back in London. I enjoy, they're not creative in artistic sense, but they're physical because my work's so creative. So in one sense, just these physical competitive things that allow me to be with friends, connection. I love game nights.
Brilliant.
I'm a big fan of game nights.
Good.
And so it seems like anything that's collaborative and competitive makes me feel good because my work's so creative already. So I think I don't crave creativity, but I do crave that desire to play and be free.
So many of us mistake approval for worth. We think if we perform well enough, we'll finally feel enough. 5, becoming before you believe.
Before we go into the other 3, which I really want to do, I want to ask you, I'm taking this tangent because I can feel people thinking about it. And I'm like, okay, I want to ask it. Like, fake it till you make it. Is it actually good advice?
Fake it till you make it is something that we hear constantly. I don't necessarily like the idea of faking anything, because I think that links to inauthenticity and it might give people permission to do things that are completely insincere. I like to use what Amy Cuddy describes as be it until you become it, which is, it's a matter of semantics, but I think it resonates so much more with people who are all about sincerity and authenticity and integrity. You do not have to fake being someone else. You need to be that person. Have the energy that you want to be exuding. See yourself achieving what you want to see, who you want to be, right? And then show up every day as if you've already achieved it. There is this remarkable thing that happens, which has not been able to be measured just yet. When someone puts out to the universe, I want to achieve this, I believe I'm this, and then they start acting in a way that is aligned with that, things are attracted to them. Opportunities come their way. Importantly too, though, they also take the steps to put them on that path.
This is the real game changer. It's not about waiting until you feel confident. It's about acting as your future self until your brain updates the belief. 6, why the brain fears uncertainty.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? That the human mind either imagines everything going wrong.
Yeah.
Or imagines everything going right.
Yeah.
But then you're presenting this like middle ground of be pragmatic, be aware, if this, then that. And that's the reality of life. Like, that's where you're going to live. Like, if you just sit there in dreamland and think of everything being perfect, we know that's never going to happen. And also we have this tendency to just think in nightmares where, well, everything's going wrong. Nothing's ever going to work out. I'm not worth anything. And we almost gravitate to these extremes because they feel safer in a weird way. Why do we do that? Why do we gravitate to these extremes?
The brain craves certainty. The brain fundamentally craves certainty. And the reason why, when we look at fundamentally why the brain does what it does, its primary function, a lot of people say its primary function is to protect us. But there's a little bit more to it. The primary function of the brain really is to make sure that the rest of the body is doing what it needs to do while using the least amount of metabolic energy, right? So it needs us to function while using as little energy as possible. And so part of that is obviously protecting you, because then if you're in a situation where you're having to deal with something terrible happening, the brain has to put in a lot more effort. So it will often magnify everything that could go wrong, because if it does that, it gives you a sense of certainty. No, this is going to happen. You're going to fail. You're going to fall short. They're going to laugh at you. They're going to reject you.
And at least you know.
At least you know, so that you don't do the thing. Because if you do the thing and that happens, your brain's going to have to put in a lot more work to get you through that. So if it can prevent you from taking that step, and we actually refer to this as what's called the misguided protector in our mind. It's that voice, it's an inner deceiver, and it's trying to protect us, but it's misguided. But fundamentally, it will highlight everything that could go wrong so that we don't take action, because then it succeeds. Then we're safe, but we're stuck. And then the other extreme, of course, is only visualizing where we want to be, because again, it's certainty. No, I'm guaranteed for that to happen. And then we know what happens when you hit a roadblock. Suddenly everything crumbles. And then you go into the other side. Oh no, all these things are going to go wrong. So when we recognize that this is just our brain doing what it needs to do, there's something else which is really interesting here. There is a connection between intelligence and anxiety. People who tend to be higher on IQ ratings of IQ, they tend to be more aware of complexity, more aware of all the risks that could go wrong, which then leads them to overthink about those risks and then overthink about what could happen if those risks actually occurred, which increases anxiety, which reduces confidence, and then reinforces that initial state of awareness of the complexity. And so if you're listening to this and you feel like you're constantly overthinking and you're constantly aware of risks, it could be that you have a slightly higher than average IQ, but it's also important to know that we can break that cycle. We call it the spiral interrupt technique. When this is happening, the part of the brain that's activated is the emotion center, the threat detection center. It's trying to identify everything that could go wrong to keep you safe. So what you can do is control your attention. Bring your attention back to what can I control right now by literally saying to yourself, this is my brain doing what it does. I am safe to act anyway. So again, simply by doing that, by consciously controlling your thoughts, you are re-engaging those prefrontal regions, which reduces activity in the amygdala, in the fear centers, and allows you to have that moment of rationality to then decide what's next.
Yeah, I can think of a really good personal example of that. I remember, so I was very fortunate to go to public speaking school from age 11 to 18 and had training and found it comfortable being on stage and everything else. But then as soon as my scales started to change and I started to work in different audiences and different arenas and different spaces, I could notice that my heart rate would go up. I could notice that my hands would start to shake. I could notice that I felt sweaty palms. I could notice that I felt nervous and anxious. And I used to start to think, well, I have the skills and what am I doing wrong here? And I'd overthink that. And then I'd overthink and go, oh my God, everyone's going to see my hand shaking. And then am I going to hold the card or should I put it down? Or what if my slides, and then you're overthinking it. And it's what you just said. And I had a different set of words for it that I would say internally. And it was just, no, this is what happens when I care.
Yes.
And what I started to realize was, when I care, my body's going to do this and I can go and give an amazing talk anyway, but I care. That's all it's showing me. And I don't need to stop this, or I don't need to get over this, or I don't need this to disappear in order for me to go out there and do what I do. And you're so right that simple moment of, it goes back to acceptance, that this is just biologically what happens when I care.
Yeah.
I get a bit nervous and my heart beats faster and all the things that, and it's like, okay, if I can reframe that, so much can happen.
I love that you mentioned that one as well, this idea of caring, because when we acknowledge that our brain is just doing what it's wired to do, and then we can essentially interpret what we're feeling in a way that's going to serve us. And so we can either interpret that heart rate, as you said, as you get into the overthinking of the overthinking, and then you're stressed about the stress. It's called a meta emotion, where it's like an emotion about an emotion, and it just spirals out of control. Or you can say, no, my brain is just doing its job. I'm prepared. I'm ready. I'm going to be of service here. I care. I care about delivering a good outcome. And it's powerful when you recognize that.
Your brain is built to protect you, even if protection often looks like avoidance. It's biology, not the lack of willpower. 7. Practical reframes.
After dinner, there would be this chant, Shade bayad bederse, which means Shade has to dance for us. And it was great. When I was a kid, I'd get up and I'd do my little thing and they'd watch and they'd cheer, and it was fantastic. But then as I got older, I started to enjoy it less and less. But I didn't know how to say no. And so at the age of 9 or 10 or 12, I still felt like I had to perform to make people happy. This was entirely in my head. If I had communicated to them or set a boundary, I said, look, I don't feel like it, they would have been fine. My family loved me. I didn't know. And I internalized from a young age that I am only as good as the performance I'm giving, which means making other people happy. And I have carried that with me through my entire career. In fact, one of the drivers of me doing a PhD, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done, was because of this feeling of not being enough and needing to still prove myself, which is the wrong reason to do anything. And I will tell you this much, it's done, and I still haven't developed that acceptance. So it's an ongoing process for me, and I'm very aware of it, and I'm working on the habits to develop it. But when I entered the workforce, so I did law because I did really great in high school, and I had a lot of pressure to use those grades. So it was like law, medicine, engineering. I wasn't going to do meta engineering, so I did law. I did it with psychology because I was passionate about people. But law was so difficult for me that I had to focus so much on it. And I had to overcompensate because I didn't feel like I belonged. I tried to drop it after the first class. But in any case, I kept with it. Never felt like I belonged. I was able to do really well. I got fantastic grades at the end, got a job in a top tier commercial law firm. But that feeling of, this is not me, this is not for me, stuck with me. And I was trying to fake it till I made it. So I was becoming someone different. I was speaking differently. I was showing up differently, trying to sound smart and credible, using big, fancy words to fit in. What I now know is that that can backfire. Studies have been found that when you use unnecessarily complex language, where you're trying to be perceived as more credible and competent, it does the opposite and it undermines your credibility and your competence. Simplicity. It's all about simplicity, but I didn't know that. So I carried that through banking. I was so full of anxiety. I'd literally hide behind my cubicle so people couldn't give me work, because if they didn't know I was there, I wouldn't basically be given it. Then I moved into banking and finance, convinced that if I moved into a different industry, I could start fresh, reinvent myself, leave the doubt behind. Do you think that happened?
No.
Absolutely not. Doubt doesn't work like that. I took it with me because of my self-image, because I was carrying that self-image around, the scars I had. And again, I came from a wonderfully supportive family, and still I had scars. And one of the things as I was doing research for this book is, there's a lot of talk about attachment theory and those early experiences. What some people experience is a secure attachment style when they're young. They have a supportive environment full of love and validation, and yet still as adults, they feel like they're not enough. And could be one of two reasons. It could be that you feel so indebted to your family that you feel like you need to keep performing for them to make them proud. The second reason is that you might also have had a sibling who was challenging just by nature of their personality, and you saw that and you didn't want to be that. And so you became the opposite. You became the good kid to be that for your parents, and you just take that with you. So that was me. And then I started feeling guilty about, why am I feeling this self-doubt? I have no reason to. And so it became this whole big thing. Anyway, 7 years in banking and finance, I eventually found my way. I tapped into roles that I loved, learned to lean on my strengths, and I stopped trying to be like everybody else and realized, hey, I'm here because I have some value to offer. How do I tap into that value? And then so that was kind of my journey.
Yeah.
And that, I completely forgot the question that you asked me, but that's a little bit about how I got there. Yeah. Oh, what I wanted to share is something that I used to do, which people listening might do if they struggle with acceptance. Because we want other people to be happy with us, we say yes compulsively, reflexively, before we even know what we're saying yes to. So we end up taking on more work. We end up doing more than most people. We end up exhausted because we don't know how to say no. Saying no is a superpower, but it all comes down to how you say it. So something that we encourage is what's called intentional delay. All it means, studies have found that if you just delay by a number of milliseconds, you make a better decision under pressure. So what that means is if someone asks you to do something, instead of immediately, yes, sure, and then having to spend your entire weekend at work, you would say, I would love to help. Let me get back to you by the end of the day to make sure I am able to. Or let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you within an hour. So you're doing two things. You're creating a delay and then committing to get back to them. That process allows you some space to then ask yourself, okay, is this something that I genuinely want to do or I feel compelled to do because I don't feel like I'm enough? You run it through that little criteria. And then if it's compulsion because you don't feel like you're enough, you give them a polite decline. And if it is something you want to do, you go ahead and you do it. That is a powerful way to remind yourself that what you need matters too. And you can politely decline without affecting a relationship.
Yeah, that's the hardest part I think we all have, because I know you write about in the book that we respond to social rejection like physical pain.
Yes.
We think that if someone, and social rejection works two ways, right? Like one social rejection is you're not invited to a party. But the other type of social rejection is you saying no and then thinking the other person thinks you're mean or bad or rejects you in the sense of, oh, you're not good at your job. And I think we often don't talk about that second version of social rejection, which you get from standing up, setting boundaries, whatever it may be, where you go, I don't think I can do that. And then someone goes, oh, I knew you didn't care. Right? Like a friend or whatever it may be. And that's a feeling of social rejection, which feels like a punch in the gut.
It does.
It feels like someone just stabbed you because you're like, no, I do care. I love you. I'm there for you. And you're like, no. So so many of these things are so hardwired.
Mhm.
Like you just said, your example.
Like they said, confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to move in spite of it. So to tie it all up, if there's one thing to take away today, it's this. The world doesn't prove your worth. Your inner story does. Your brain isn't your enemy. It's just echoing beliefs you've practiced the longest. Change that belief and watch your reality transform. Drop a comment with the belief you're ready to question. Like if this helped you see something new. Subscribe so we can keep growing side by side. Vamos, one calm step at a time.